I have a great pleasure of next welcoming on stage Tiffany Bova. Tiffany is Global Customer Growth and Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce, and it will be super exciting to hear what she's going to share with us about how we can succeed better in the future in a changing world. So please, Tiffany, we will hear from you in a minute. Thank you.
The revolutions came in waves. Water and steam mechanized production, electricity created mass production, and electronics and IT automated everything. It brought us the mainframe, the client server, the cloud. And now the next wave is building, a blurring of the physical and digital world. A fourth industrial revolution is here. But the most profound change is not happening in technology itself. It's happening to the customer. The great equalizers, technology, mobility, and the internet have made customers exponentially smarter, faster, and put them in control like no other time in history. Welcome to the age of the customer. These customers are not looking for a product. They're looking for a trusted advisor and an experience. They don't want features and gimmicks. They want a platform they can build and shape with you into the future. They're not just looking for answers. They want deep, meaningful insights. And the latest generation doesn't even want to talk to you until they meet your community. But how do you pivot your entire ecosystem and innovate to create this modern-day customer experience? The forces of disruption and innovation are shaping the future of every industry. To win, you need to connect to your customers in a whole new way. For the past 17 years, our focus as a company has been on one simple thing: the customer. The age of the customer has arrived, and everything you need to succeed is here.
Great. Well, thank you guys very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come to such a beautiful country and spend an hour with you talking about how to build high-performance organizations leveraging what Salesforce calls the age of the customer. I recently joined Salesforce. It's been about 6 months. Previously to being here, I was a distinguished analyst and research fellow at Gartner, and where I focused exclusively on helping organizations think and reimagine the way in which they go to market with their products, how they sell, how they engage and compete in customer experience. I was brought on board here to sort of help tell that story and evangelize the fact that the new competitive battleground is really orienting itself around customer experience, that no longer can products just stand on their own, even if they're highly innovative like it is here. I want to start by saying it was fantastic doing some research on the company as I was coming into town. And I was flying in on Finnair, and I was on page 26 of the airline magazine, and here's a whole story about you guys. And I went, oh, let me rip that out. This is great. And I'm like, hey, this is where I'm going. It was great. So as I was doing research, I must say I was very impressed. I was not as familiar with your company as I probably should have been. However, I was very impressed by all the innovation and all the fantastic work you've been doing, and congratulations on being on the innovative companies list and cracking that top 100. And I think you even cracked right at the 50 mark-ish. So congratulations on that. So this presentation, I want to try to make it very, very interactive. Ask questions. I know there's a pod that gets thrown around, so that might be a little odd as I'm standing up here. But if you do have a question, do raise your hand. If not, we're going to have some time for some questions at the end. So when we talk about the age of the customer, I think one of the things that was asked of me is, what does that mean? What does it mean to sort of reorient the business around what we call the age of the customer? And really what it's starting to say is that everything and everyone is connected. And the driving forces behind that technically, as you know, is cloud and mobile and social, data science and IoT. And now I'd say even more so, it has this analytics capability, right? The intelligence. I like to say, and people have said actually, that data is the new oil. I'd have to then say that analytics is the refinery and intelligence is the petrol. And so having more intelligence around what your customers want, what they need, and how they're experiencing your products becomes far more important than the data, if you will, or the oil, or the technology that's powering the innovation. Because at the moment of truth, the customer has an experience with your brand that is not about the engine that's behind the walls or the hidden. It is the moment in which they're standing in that elevator or on the escalator or on whatever it is that you produce. And so we have thousands and millions and billions and trillions of connected devices. And on the customer side, when I talk about sort of the go-to-market and the selling and the engagement and the service, what's interesting is it used to be a human-to-human having an interaction with a technology or with a company or with a brand. And now with all of these sensors and everything that's getting much more intelligent, the trick here now is we have things that are communicating with things. Gartner actually made a prediction that there's going to be 60 billion service calls by 2018 by things. Who's going to answer those calls? Is it going to be a robot, another thing, a human, a combination? How do you respond to service calls now when the customer is actually redefining itself from a human to potentially a sensor or a thing? And so when you think about the age of the customer, we have to broaden and reimagine the fact that it isn't just the human customer. It's also all the devices and all the technology and all the sensors that we're now putting out into the market. And so how do you create this competitive advantage? How do you rethink the fact that the customer is changing, the experience and the expectation between technology is changing, and how do you use that in a way that starts to blend itself and blur itself from the B2B world, the business-to-business kind of engagement and interaction, and learn from what's happening in the business-to-consumer world? So how many of you purchase things online? Okay. That starts to happen more and more. I remember when I asked that 15 years ago, nobody raised their hands, but now we've caught where almost the entire room raises their hands. And this is a little different for me, right? As I sort of work my way into learning my Salesforce talk track, this would have been a comment I would have made in my last life, is I would say to you, how many of you feel like you get that same consumer-like frictionless commerce experience at work? I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm not asking you to raise your hand. But when you think about that, we have a very different experience and emotional engagement in our personal consumer life with technology and with brands than we do when we are with a business. And so thinking about these consumer brands, if you think about Amazon, any of you who know the history of Salesforce, our CEO, Mark Benioff, said, how do we create a software company, a services company that has a frictionless buying experience similar to buying a book on Amazon? I mean, that was sort of the catalyst of this company. When you think about Fitbit and sharing all of the health information from a consumer perspective about what I've done all day, how much I've walked, and really that's this great psychology of the gamification of exercise, right? Because when you're at 9,200 steps, you're like, okay, it's 10 o'clock at night, I only have 800 left, and you're sort of walking around like this, right? And the Fitbit now has the opportunity and the ability to speak with your scale in your bathroom to tell you what's going on and how far you should really walk. And then the scale in your Fitbit talks to your refrigerator that locks you out at 6 o'clock at night. So think about the consumer experience and all the things that we're able to do there and say, how do we apply some of that thinking, or even Tesla from an update and a software perspective? One thing goes wrong in one of your elevators and one of your systems. How do you do a one-to-many fix on it versus having to send out a human the way we maybe used to have to do it? And so looking at these consumer kinds of experiences and engagements as a catalyst for you to reimagine, how do I create that kind of frictionless movement, whether it be what we see at Uber. I can tell you that many people say to me, we're trying to Uberize our business, or Airbnb our business, or Amazon our business. And I get the association, but it isn't really that you want to do that to your business. It's what can we learn from what they've done and how they've disrupted their own industry, and how do we take those learnings and apply them where it works in our industry? How do we take those examples I just said? How do we create a relationship between your products and services and this consumer who at the moment of their way to work, they're a consumer in that motion. You've sold to another business who is building a building. That's your customer, but ultimately your customer is the person who in their consumer life is heading off to work. You know, how could you make that work? Could the Fitbit see them walking up to the escalator and say, really, you want to go on the escalator or should you walk up the stairs? There's ways to have fun with thinking about using this consumer technology in new ways. And why this is happening and why it's happening now. Back in 1999, I worked for the largest web hosting company in the US. We were 4 times the size of Rackspace, if you're familiar with Rackspace. I was doing all the private label hosting for a telco in the US called Verizon. And I was trying to convince CIOs that they no longer needed to have lunch with their servers in the data center. And they didn't understand that they couldn't go in and hug them anymore at noon. And I tried to tell them, really, they're going to be okay. I'll take just as good a care of them. And I couldn't get them to imagine the fact that their technology was not going to be something they could manage and own. And 16 years later, we now have the conversation about putting all kinds of information in the cloud that we never would have imagined doing it back then. And why this is happening and why it's becoming more important is we, as an industry, need to get to the future before our customers do so we can meet them there. I think this company is a fantastic example. I mean, it's difficult for me to give this presentation in front of this audience because you guys understand innovation so well. But normally I'm giving this presentation to someone who's not on the top innovative list. It's somebody who's trying to find their way to understand innovation. But when you think about this customer and this comment I'm making, please understand I'm talking about maybe this new customer, the customer that might be a thing, the customer that's a consumer who's having an experience. Is it new relationships you may have with somebody like Fitbit in that example I gave? Or app developers that are going to say, look, we know that you really enjoyed your elevator ride on that glass elevator, and it's the tallest one in Asia, and we power it, and here's the app that you can experience it again and see the video, and we push it, and we give you that kind of experience, and you want to offer it up before someone else does, and you want to meet them there in an engagement and in a relationship that they already expect, remember, in their consumer life. So you have to think about how do we welcome them when they arrive. This set of speed, I'm not going to, obviously you can't see it from the back, but what this is saying is it sort of is running through all of these innovative jumps from new innovations to how long it took from an adoption perspective. And so it took the landline telephone 73 years to go from 10% to 90%. It took PCs 30 years. It took smartphones and tablets surpass that level in 8, and that's not even fast. You can see some things come in and out of market in 2 years because adoption didn't happen, and the original equipment manufacturer or whoever it might be completely gets in and out of market. Or they introduce and create the industry, and then they decide they no longer want to, they've seeded it, they no longer want to invest in it, and someone comes behind them. And so with this accelerated pace of change comes all these real challenges of data. Data is just amplifying to a level where we have so much data, we're not actually looking at it, and it's telling us what our customers actually want from us and what the market expects. However, we're not able to get to all of it to make different decisions. Is there data out that you may know that, between floors 10 and 15, between the hours of 9 and noon, no one's going to those floors. And so maybe then you communicate to say, maybe we should have them turn off the lights in those and turn down the power for sustainability, because I can tell traffic patterns during the course of the day of where people are or are not in the building. And so adding additional value back because you have the data that your customers potentially do not. And then that data fragmentation of having that information in multiple places. Once again, I know that you're a big Salesforce customer, so once again, keep the audience in mind. But when you have the single source of information and the single truth, you should be able to be making very different decisions because of it. Just having the data and having it in a single place is fantastic. And of course, obviously, we appreciate your business. But using that data in new ways is what really starts to separate you from an experience perspective, because the oil and gas industry, as an example, only 33% of them are automating the processes with mobile apps. So they're taking the data fragmentation, they're looking at data proliferation, but at the end of the day, they're starting to change their practices because of that information that they're learning. So once again, having the information is interesting. It's like, if you think about my analogy of data is the oil, analytics is the refinery, and the intelligence is petrol. If you have your car sitting in your driveway and you have gas in it and you're not driving it, you're not getting anything out of the petrol. Why'd you buy the petrol? So thinking about how do you actually move yourself forward. And one of the biggest challenges is this data skills shortage. We have this proliferation of data, yet we don't have enough people to actually analyze it and give us the information. So when you think about innovation and you're thinking about what do you want to innovate on next, making sure you're looking at the data that you're capturing from all of your products and services that are in market and trying to figure out what are the things we could be amplifying and doing differently. Using, by the way, the technology that now is at our disposal. Right? Using and exploiting the fact that all of these sensors are giving us more data, we have information and access to it, you are the keeper of that data, you've combined it into one single location, you're starting to analyze it and look for trends, pivot and make very different decisions because of it, recreate and reimagine who the customer is, bringing that all together in a way that says, we're going to use technology competitively. Now let me be clear, once again, remembering the audience. You guys use technology competitively behind the walls, which people don't see. How do we help you use technology competitively in the face of the consumer who's standing in the elevator, who's on the escalator, that can really experience your brand in new ways? Because CEOs are saying the impact of technology across the largest of organizations, this rapid technology innovation is the biggest challenge of keeping up. And this iterative process of, we may not get it right every time. It doesn't have to be perfect. In your case, it needs to be perfect because you have people's lives in your hands. But I'm talking about the things that are actually physically being seen by the consumer. And so when you think about the most transformative trends, they're all being driven by technology. And people sometimes are worried about disrupting themselves and disrupting themselves right out of a particular industry, but you have to think about it differently. And so when you look at smart cities, it's a great example. There's a presentation I used to give that had a plaza scene and people milling about and autonomous trains coming in and out of this plaza. And it's interesting how we may actually think that we walk up as humans to an autonomous train right to the edge and we stand there and wait and there is no driver in it. We totally trust the fact that this technology has come so far that we will stand there with our children while an autonomous train goes whizzing by, even though there's no human directing that train. And the train may be speaking to the building that they now know, people are starting to come to work, the lights turn on, the air conditioning turns on. People are driving to work in autonomous vehicles, parking in the garage. They then had to park across the street because it was less expensive than their own building. At the end of the day, at 6 o'clock, the parking rates change. The car gets notified that the parking rate has changed. It reparks itself into the new building. And then when you're done with your meeting and you call your car and it can tell from your calendar that your meeting is done and it's time for you to go downstairs in an elevator, which got called, by the way, because they knew you were done with the meeting. And you go downstairs and your car is waiting for you. And then it puts a little message up saying, hey, I saved, €5 in parking. Will you take me for a car wash? And everything I just said technically can happen today. Does it happen? No. It will. And so this goes back to how do you get there before your customers expect it? How could you actually make that connection? I added the elevator story. That wasn't in my original video. But I added the elevator story because that's part of that puzzle that could have just easily clicked right in there and snapped into that story. That how many of you use Google Calendar today? And it will actually push to you and say, you've got 10 minutes or 15 minutes traffic to your next meeting, or it's going to take you this long to get to here, or you should be dialing into this call now. It's now pushing notifications to me based on it knows what I have to do throughout the day. Now you can turn it on or off, but it should now, thinking about me from a heavy travel perspective, knowing I'm leaving a meeting, it should actually push to me, and Uber should say, do you want me to get you a car? And I should say yes. And when I walk downstairs, it's all been seamlessly handled for me because the intelligence behind everything that's on my smartphone should have all that information. And then I'll plug back in the elevator. And it calls an elevator for me, and I go downstairs to my car, right? Thinking about that in this smart city, you have this fantastic opportunity to be the center. You could argue that the car now is the new platform. It's carrying all of our information, our personal information. It knows what we do all the time. So could you say the elevator is the platform for a building? The movement of people, where people are, what they're doing, are you the center hub of what's happening? Are you the heartbeat of those buildings? And what kind of information could you be providing and services could you be providing? Because pretty soon, this is going to be what you see on the elevator. Right now, there's no buttons. So when people ask me how difficult it was to go from Gartner to Salesforce, I say there was two things that have taken me, and this is not made up because of where I am. There are two things that have taken me time to get used to. One is going from Microsoft products to Google everything. That was one big transition that I had to make. The second is I haven't been able to figure out our elevator bays at 50 Fremont yet. I get in the wrong elevator, it takes me to the wrong floor, I can't hit a button, I gotta get off. Which elevator bay is going to get me to the floor I need? I mean, it's been really confusing for me to figure out. While very intelligent, this human, not so intelligent, so I haven't been able to totally man the elevator bays yet. But I can tell you that pretty soon we're going to be able to, I could change it potentially on the fly versus literally at this point now I have to get off on the third floor so that I can walk over to the right elevator bay and go to where I need to go. But figuring this out, and when you look at the first one was speed, the second one is technology, all of those things are available to us today. The third thing is this whole customer experience. And I think this is an opportunity where this brand in particular has tremendous room to improve the customer experience. When I say that, I mean the consumer standing in the elevator. Like, I've been in many of the buildings that you guys have powered, didn't know it was you. I want to know it's you. I want to have a relationship. I thought it was really great. I talk about the elevator ride, but I talk about it from a building perspective, that this building gave me this experience. Actually, you gave me this experience. It just happened to be at their building. But I have no relationship with your brand at all. And so the brand is the sum of all of your customer touch points. There's no question you technically lead. That's not the conversation we're having. It's how do you raise the visibility of the fact that you are the one that's powering these fantastic experiences in some of the most iconic buildings around the world. And so how do you think differently about that customer experience? And how do you move from being reactive when people call you, that there's a service call potentially, and that example I gave where it's pushing one-to-many because it knows all this data, you're pushing out to say, no one's going to these floors during these times. That's the proactive, that you're telling them what you think is going to happen, to you're getting really predictive where you're saying, look, I don't know why the power is turning on at 6 o'clock in the morning. There's only 3 elevator rides that happen. I mean, you really just shouldn't be turning it on till 7 a.m., but on Mondays, because people come in much later, where on Fridays, they start leaving earlier, and you start to predict what is it going to look like. So these expectations have changed from me being reactive. I reach out and someone helps me as a consumer, to then it's proactively coming and talking to me, to now they're actually anticipating what I'm going to need from them, and they bring everything together at one time. So this is where you change the dynamic. You change the dynamic in this way. Are you a company-centric driven innovation company? Meaning, you love your technology, it's shiny, it's new, it's motivating, it's inspiring. I watched a bunch of videos, that article in the Finnair, I mean, really fantastic stuff. Your technology is where you shine and where you get excited. And it's very much sort of, this is what we think the market's going to do, and that's why we're moving. When I say slow, I don't mean slow in a bad way. I mean that it's just not quite so iterative. It takes time. It's a closed process. You're making these design and development decisions internally, and there's very little customer input because you sort of know where the market is going, versus being very customer-centric and customer-driven, going from the outside in to say, what do we think, right, the customer of the future is going to need? We want to meet them there when we get there. The underlying technology is constantly innovating. It's much more agile, it's much more transparent, and it's absolutely collaborative with customers. So getting much more engagement around, do you want us to start to tell you when people are coming in on Mondays and Fridays? Do you want that kind of information? Do you want us to create an experience with an app? And we're going to do it because that's where we think the market is going. I remember when television screens and the advertising first started making it at elevators, right? It was almost annoying. It's like, it's my only peaceful, quiet time. And then it was, volume, and you're trying to turn down the volume. And now people have gotten almost immune to the fact that they expect this always-on entertainment, view of things no matter where we are. And how could you change that to something that becomes much more positive? And so that is this one-to-one customer journey that is changing. This example here is where the car is actually, remember I said the car is becoming more of the platform. The car is actually carrying now commerce capabilities. You're driving down the street. It knows based on your usage that you have a Dunkin' Donuts application, and there's a Dunkin' Donuts down the street. It pushes, would you like us to order you coffee? Remember, let's go back to the autonomous car. It drives you there. You don't have to pay for anything. You sort of just reach out your hand, grab your coffee, and sort of keep moving on. Except the autonomous car part of that. This story is real today, powered by us. But ultimately, you have to think about if Dunkin' Donuts is trying to compete with, in our market, in the United States and other places in the world, they're competing with a Starbucks, and now they're competing also with a McDonald's. What are the things they can do differently in order to say, now we've got a deal from the car that's pushing information, that knows the apps on the phone. It will then create the experience where a customer can have this frictionless and seamless experience. And once again, we could argue this is not what we get at work. Right? This is what we try or tend to get in our consumer lives. So as we push through this age of the customer, everything is getting smarter. Like I said, my meetings, if it attached to my calendar and knew I had to be on the 8th floor, why couldn't it just say, you have to leave right now? And it knows that I've left the room, and it literally calls the elevator, and it takes me down to the 8th floor. And so thinking about that predictive analytics, the machine learning around, is it going to tell me some intelligence that I then can apply to my daily business? And so customers are creating so much data, and this new style of engaging and working with people is being driven by these things. Yet so much data is getting left unused, and it's only going to get bigger. So more and more, I like to say that increasingly the experience actually is the product. You could argue that you may use just okay products in our personal lives, maybe even in our business lives, but if the experience is better, then you're going to always sort of stay loyal to that brand. You will also pay a little bit more for that experience. Is Starbucks a brand that's big here? Or are you guys, so there's just a couple. So what's interesting is, I will use this example often where there's a lot of Starbucks, and I'll say, oh, how many people drink Starbucks, right? And, 3/4 of the room will raise their hand. And I say, okay, keep your hands up if you like the coffee. And like half the hands go down. I go, it's really a fascinating psychology project, because you all spend €6 a day on coffee you just kind of don't really like. I'm fascinated by it. Why? It's the experience. I walk up, I order the same way. I know exactly what kind of drink I'm going to get. I know the temperature. I know what products they're using. It's consistent for me everywhere in the world. I use that app all the time, and it's seamless. I don't have to worry about having currency. I don't have to worry about the currency exchange rate. I just use my app. And so even if the coffee for me is just kind of okay, I will pay for the experience, because I don't have to have the currency. I don't have to use my credit card. In America, we just got the chip. We don't have pins. I mean, it's a whole thing. Versus, I just want to show my app. So I'm willing to spend that extra euro in order to not have to deal with everything else. Once again, the experience is the product. It isn't so much about the coffee, obviously. Now, where are these experiences and the information for what people are looking for? What's really fascinating is this sort of external collaborative innovation delivering different kinds of returns, meaning collaborating with customers and shareholders. This was a study that was done I don't know if you can read that very well, but it says data and analytics, customer relationship management, then it's R&D, it gets into social, and what this is saying is CEOs are generating the greatest return when they engage with wider stakeholders through data and analytics of customer relationship management systems, which obviously, thankfully, you use ours. So the good news is that is there information you can mine from that, and they're telling you what they want. So this external stakeholder is becoming more and more influential. And so where they're starting to apply this is large organizations are looking externally for insights. They're going to internal innovation teams, then customer and user feedback. The CEO is heavily involved, then employee and suppliers, chief technology officer, chief marketing officer, and chief R&D. That's where customer input is actually helping generate ideas. It used to be pretty much that inside out, as I was saying, right? Now it's getting much more customer-centric. So Peter Drucker wrote way back in 1989 that he thought that companies were going to start to look at their own performance through organization feedback from colleagues and customers. It's taken us about 30 years to get ourselves there. So we knew that customers were going to become more disruptive. The trick was, how do we capture that information in something that can allow us to analyze it and do something differently because of it? And so for me, I believe that your best growth engine is actually your customers advocating on your behalf. This slide alone and that video that preceded me are probably the two biggest reasons I took this job. That video I saw 2 years ago at Dreamforce, which is, are any of you going to Dreamforce, by the way, in San Francisco in a couple weeks? It's okay, there's 140,000 other people that are going to show up. And they've actually had to bring in cruise ships because there's not enough hotel rooms in San Francisco to actually handle us. And some little band called U2 is performing for free on Wednesday night. Yeah, it's a whole thing. So besides, that's why I joined. But the other reason was the video of that inspiration of really reimagining the possible. But this is absolutely it. I think no other company I've seen in the 10 years of working at my previous job, and how many, do 50 or 60 of these a year, and I'm in front of hundreds of customers. There's no company I've seen that has done a better job of having customers advocate on our behalf. To tell our story is really customers telling our story. We rarely have to tell our own story. It really is about customers saying, look, when I started to use this technology, this is what happened to our business. This is how we were, we reimagined it. It's a strategic partnership, et cetera. And so how do you get your customers to start to absolutely advocate on your behalf? And that's where it really turns the corner. Because then your entire sales process, your marketing organization, the way that you socially go out and reach out and talk to people can also change. And so getting your customers to tell your story when architects are with architects and we're building are out for awards and all that, and they're talking about how fully engaged you are, how you're absolutely willing to have customer-driven innovation conversations, how you're completely changing the paradigm of what it means to actually safely move people through the world and through their personal and professional lives. That's the story. When I read many of your press releases at the bottom, sort of about you, I thought that was fantastic. What I didn't see, though, was the tie to then the technology, right? I see that story in the about, but I don't see that story when I'm experiencing your brand. That's that disconnect. And so thinking about having customers advocate on your behalf is taking that about you paragraph, and how do you actually make that a reality for every customer who is using your service and your products. That's where you start to have people advocating on your behalf, where they start talking about your technology in a way that has really just enhanced. It doesn't matter how I'm on my way to work every single day, it's the grind, but you know what? The best part of my day is that elevator ride. I get to see the city. I get something from it. It's easy, it's seamless, it's enjoyable, it's, and ultimately, think about that autonomous train, right? And it's safe. That's sort of the given. But so really think about how do you get your customers to advocate on your behalf, is you have to raise your brand visibility beyond just the little logo, which I saw in the Hilton elevator last night, right over here, and I went, oh, I know who they are, I had sort of not noticed before. Obviously, my eye wasn't turned on to it. Now it is. Now you're in trouble. You're going to get all these emails from me, I'm sure. However, at the end of the day, the goal here is to try to change the thinking from being a very technology-driven company, which you guys have mastered, obviously, to thinking about how do you become a customer-driven company in a way that thinks about the customer as the individual, not potentially the customer who's buying your technology today. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions, but hopefully that stimulated some thinking. Once again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and happy to answer questions. Is the cube anywhere close? Okay. A man who's secure. Excellent.
First I have to congratulate you for having a title of Innovation Evangelist.
So everybody loves this title. Everybody
People Flow Evangelist. So
yeah, everybody loves this title.
So there's obviously a big change going on, and you talked a lot in the beginning, especially about go to the market, and there's a big change going on. It's very fast and it's very rapid. So one would assume that you see quite a kind of relevant sample of different companies which have been either successful in kind of managing the change or not been too successful. So kind of I'm working in frontline, so maybe the blunt question is that, what can we in a frontline level do differently? And, what do the successful companies do better than the others on kind of implementing the whole change, which is now happening into our sales force, for example?
Yes, so
it's a kind of broad picture you're painting in here, which is super exciting.
Yep.
Kerttu would shoot me again for this one, but something has to change next Tuesday. So. Exactly. So it's a long discussion.
Right.
Let's go there.
Yeah. So here's what I'd say. I'd answer it this way: that technology is significantly different than it was 10 years ago. I think we'd all agree with that. Secondarily, based on this, I think we'd now all agree, and you probably did before I got here, that the customer is different, right? Is the customer still a human? Is it a architect? Is it a thing? Is it a system? Like the customer is very different. Not only that, they're on a very different buying journey than they used to be. However, unfortunately, we tend to sell the same way we always have, even though the technology is very different and the buyer is very different. The way in which we approach a customer, engage a customer, is still very, you call people, like I call the building, I'm going to get in this, I'm going to do, and it's the same way we've always sold, where we're not taking advantage of the fact that how do we get our customers to sell on our behalf, and how do we actually lead with the experience. So I like to say to our sales reps here at Salesforce that I don't think we sell technology, I think we sell change. And selling change is difficult. It lengthens the sales cycle, which sales reps don't like to do, especially when you have someone who says, what are you going to change by Tuesday, right? That's not helpful, although I get it. I totally understand. I'm doing the best I can, kind of thing, right? Right, yeah, I'm here for you. I don't know what Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. But if you think about that, then you say, you have to swivel. What if you walked up and said, look, I'm not really here to sell you the elevator. I'm really simplifying here for a second. I'm here to change the experience of people coming to and from work, right? And I want to create this, that's very different than having the technology. Look, we're quieter, we're safer, we invented all this technology. You talk about the widgets and the speeds and feeds is one sales cycle and one sales approach and one marketing approach and a very targeted audience who wants to know those technical things versus I'm coming in to talk about how do I actually change the engagement people have with your building. I want to be the heartbeat of that building, and this is how we're going to do it. You can't necessarily have that conversation to a really technical engineer architect, right? They're going to go, whatever. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. So you have to make sure you're sending the right message and having the right message. But I think that that's the biggest change. And then the problem is the sales cycle really changes here versus this sales cycle really well. Right? This is a much longer term sales cycle, right? So when I give these presentations, right, our sales reps are like, what am I going to close by Tuesday? Right? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to help you close anything by Tuesday. I can help you start to seed and grow what may close 12 to 18 months from now. But it's going to be pretty difficult for me with a presentation like this to close something by Tuesday, right? So that would be my answer, that if you're going to go down the path of selling change, lots of things have to change. Marketing, positioning, take your about your company, just take that paragraph and say, how do you sell that? You don't have to create it, you have it. But then I feel like you sell on the engineering platform and that's really where you get excited on the story versus getting excited on all the possibilities of your about paragraph. Yes? Oh, well, you guys are great. Usually Europe's really quiet. This is fabulous.
When it's about innovation, we are never quiet. This is why we are maybe in the top 50. Thank you for this very inspiring presentation. I would like to quickly come back to this concept of the perfect storm, and more precisely the chapter of the speed, which is of course very important. And you present a sentence which is very clear and appealing. This is to get to the future before our customers in order to welcome them. Now, if I refer as well to a presentation we had yesterday from Professor Shalagala, he also highlighted some examples of companies which were wrong predicting the future. And the risk, the concern I have with this sentence is that if you are wrong in predicting, you can never welcome your customer because just they took another way. So my question is, what is your recipe in Salesforce to be sure that you are right in predicting the future and that this is indeed the future that your customer are desiring, are wanting?
From Salesforce as a company? You mean us specifically, or the market? Yeah, so I'd say this. I'd say that going back to sort of one of the comments I made of having the customer be the true north for the decisions that get made here as an innovation company, and as you know, on that same list, we've been battling with Tesla the last couple of years of between 1 and 2. So I think we've sort of figured out this innovation opportunity in front of us. But it is very iterative. And because of the infrastructure and the way our business model and our technical model being cloud-based, if we roll something out almost very much like Tesla and it doesn't sort of resonate, we can pull back and try again and try again. When you talk about risking everything with an innovation, I don't think that's what we do. And so I would say this. I would say when you look across the market, popping up innovation labs that are going to try something, are you going to try it in a market, not in every single elevator you have and push to everyone, right? You have to learn and iterate and absolutely, by the way, culturally be willing to fail. It's changing the wheels on the tire as the car is going around the track. The car has to keep going around the track. You have a big business, you know, you're multi-billion-dollar business. You can't risk that. You have to find what are additional revenue streams we can get that can bolt on based on some of these things we're talking about, apps, different experience, you know, starting to create maybe a consulting practice that's around it on sustainability and usage patterns and how they can, you know, help change the air conditioning and cooling and lighting of a building based on, you know, where people are going and what they're doing. It's a totally different model. And you may say, not every customer is going to take it, and is it worthwhile for us to go after for the small market we're going to get? But if you don't go out and say, would you be willing to actually use this service for us, we wouldn't know. And it may fail, but it's definitely not going to impact the car going around the track. And I think where people have made mistakes, you know, like a Kodak, was they not only made the wrong bet, they didn't make any bet. That's different than making a small bet. I mean, they owned the digital technology. They just didn't do anything with it. Just because you're innovative, many don't then exploit that innovation. I mean, what did Apple really invent? You could argue it came from lots of places. Previously to coming to Gartner, I ran a global division of Gateway Computers, for any of you who know who Gateway is. And so people always talk to me about retail stores for Apple, and isn't it great that they, you know, created that category? I'm like, we had stores for 10 years before Apple did. So they didn't invent it, they just made it much better. And Apple's still here and Gateway is not. So at the end of the day, you know, it's all about how much risk you're willing to take. But that's a cultural question. Like, you know, culturally, how much risk are you willing to take? How will you allow things to just fail? And I don't mean on the technology, you know, safety side. I mean more on this experience side. Yes?
In your presentation, you mentioned there's a clear shortage in data analytics skills. What's your view on how we as a company can acquire or develop these talents within our company? Because it's becoming more and more important and the shortage is becoming bigger. So we are competing with companies like Nike or et cetera. So what's your view on
so there was a great article on the cover of Harvard Business Review about 18 months ago that said that the data scientist is the new sexy rock star. It was great, right? Because people are like, really? But this is why. Because there's this shortage and it's almost, you know, they're going to charge a premium, et cetera. And so I've seen a couple companies go one route, which is, I'll use American Express as an example. American Express wanted, you know, more insight and wanted more customer centricity and wanted more sort of user experience capability. And they went out and bought a little firm. And when I say a little firm, it was like 40 people, 45 people. And it was a way to get an influx because they really bought the people. So that's a way to do it. Another way is this partnering sort of in a crowdsource sort of way in which you're going out and looking for that on-demand economy of finding data scientists to work on projects. There's also services out there that allows you to put up very complex issues that if you solve it, here's what we're charging for the solving of it. And some businesses have taken 18 months and never been able to find the solve, and those kinds of communities can solve it in days. And it's a $7,000 investment or a $10,000 or a $40,000 investment versus that 18 months that got blown. So buy it, go external and say, I'm going to go to the sort of on-demand economy, right, and find those resources that way. Or I know that you've got, a very large deal with IBM around Watson, et cetera. And so is there things there from a partner perspective, right? You can go to Watson or IBM and say, how can we take advantage of some of these capabilities? Or you literally say, I'm going to go out there and battle for those resources. And the way to win in that category is you make it really fun and exciting that they want to be here because you're giving them the opportunity and the freedom to iterate and fail and learn and push the envelope on what this analytics and intelligence can really do. And then I'd say, keep an eye out for what we announce in a couple weeks at Dreamforce around a product called Einstein. Okay, I'm selling a little bit. However, to try and solve some of this, especially as it relates to our category, right? Very specifically in our category, that we have this data proliferation, and we have to be able to make this ability to get intelligence and analytics done at the speed in which the customer needs it, in a way that is scalable and seamless and doesn't always require the people side of the equation. So that's what the Einstein product will do. And if you've been watching any of our acquisitions over the last couple of years, it should be telling that story pretty clearly. We've been just buying in analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning for this reason, and it's coming together with our Einstein announcement in a couple of weeks.
Can I just,
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a question every now and then comes back to me, so I really can't hold it. But before that one, I think I can comment a little bit from that. We heard a lot of noise about data scientists. I think to me personally, I think data science is more like the person who has data mining skills or good quantitative analysis skills with business mindset and understanding, because you cannot train people to learn how you catch insights from business. You have to gain that with your business and develop, of course, with your experience. So that's what I see about adding up on your comment. So maybe we can do this in our HR renewal. We find the people internally we have with good analytical or quantitative analysis, and also long time in business, so they understand what kind of things they want to seek from the data. So coming back to my question, what is your, when we try to build a analytics functional organization in the company for a non-startup company, what are your suggestions or good things to do or not to do that leads us to the best return on investments? Because it's different from the startup. When you build from fresh, of course you can start everything together, have your data model already start from the beginning, so maybe it's easier. But for a non-startup company, we're like 100 years old company, right now we want to catch up with this, and what is your suggestion? Will us start small or big?
So I since you have the relationship with IBM and with Watson, I'm just going to use them as an example. Ginny could have absolutely said, we're a 100-year-old company, and how do we behave like a startup? And how do we do that in the engine of IBM that is very big? And instead of doing that, she did a pop-up of Watson, and it's in San Francisco, and it's completely removed from New Jersey and New York and sort of the mothership of the old way of doing things. So it has a very agile, lean startup mentality inside this big ship that is 100 years old. So you can do it that way, where it is separate and distinct in a way in which it's managed, it's run, its return on investment expectations. It wasn't like, I need it by Tuesday. It would be like, I need it like next year Tuesday, where if they had left it at the in headquarters, it would have been, we need it Tuesday. And they would have been held to a standard and that would have stopped that innovation and the sort of imagination that was happening around Watson as an example. I was just down in Australia and New Zealand last week or so. And there was a bank, 100-year-old bank, second largest bank in Australia, and they had the same sort of question, right? Lots of data, old systems, et cetera, et cetera. So they created an innovation lab, and just so you know, that innovation lab had 8 people. It was 2 data scientists, a user interface designer, UX designer, business analyst, you know, the woman who was running it, and then they had 3 sort of contractors that were floating through there, and they were doing things around 3D reality banking, because in Asia Pacific, you know, under the age of 26, they've never walked into a bank branch, so they don't even know what that's like. And so I was actually thinking, wouldn't that be cool if you did a virtual reality elevator ride of some of your very famous elevator rides? I'll take $1 for that. And so when you think about things like that, right, it's cranking out this innovation, and not everything sticks. It's like 1 in 10 sticks, but they've changed the way they, you know, take pictures of checks and this virtual reality in branches, and some of them will stick, and some of them are novelty, and they're not going to be, you know, billion-dollar businesses. But it's about getting there before your customers do, and being viewed as being, even though you're a 100-year-old bank, you're not a stodgy, slow-moving, right? You are pushing the envelope, and it has nothing to do with the core business. So those are 2 ways. I've got a chance for one more question, I think, right? Yes. Oh. Unless you give me more than 36 seconds.
Cheers. I really love the vision of your car ordering your coffee and all that. But how do you see in this age of customer, what happens to a human-to-human service moment? So what's the importance of these kind of meetings when you actually meet the people from the company?
Humans. So I love this conversation because if you haven't figured out, or maybe you haven't, I call myself a recovering seller. So I'm on, because I don't sell anymore in that way, and I don't carry a quota. And so whenever people say to me, you know, digital is going to completely replace a sales rep, I'm like, whatever, you know, it's not going to happen. And I feel that way about that comment. So I'd say 3 things. There are 3 different kinds of moments. There is a brand moment, which a human has with a brand, and that can be via, while I'm in the elevator, I get a mailer from you. You know, there's multiple ways in which you can give me a brand moment. The mistake people make is they mix that brand moment with another kind of moment. Like, give me a brand moment and make it be very specific to the brand. The next one is a service moment, which is also very service-oriented. It could be a thing talking to a thing. Like I said, that thing calling a thing. Does a human get involved? Well, maybe the thing escalates when it meets certain rules and a human gets involved. Maybe it starts with a human and goes to a thing. This is all about business process change in that service call. The third kind of moment is a sales moment, where you're really trying to sell something. And the mistake people make is they'll send a brand email, and at the bottom they'll give an offer. So they've crossed a brand moment with a sales moment. What ends up happening is the consumer opts out of all of it. And so you need to be really clear on where a human is involved and why they're involved, and the message and the connection with the other human. It could be a thing. So when the human gets involved, I mean, I can tell you that this isn't about displacing humans in this way. It's about augmenting the things that can be handled by intelligence. And then the things that are much more relationship human done has to be supported by it. But what people don't like is when the data and information is there and the human doesn't access it, and then the human acts like we know nothing about you. And so that relationship between the human and technology has to get better in order for it to be seamless between, because our humans at Dunkin' Donuts handing them the coffee. Right now, all of a sudden, Dunkin' has an opportunity for a brand moment. Don't make it bad, because then the person will feel like that whole frictionless experience wasn't good. Right? And so that's where it's the sum of everything, every touch, everything you do, from human to machine to system to email to phone call to visual, has to be connected.
Thank you very much. We will need to close here, unfortunately. Tiffany, you were slightly worried just before you started.
I know that there was going to be no questions.
And I think we would have had some tens of questions more coming in, but unfortunately we'll need to take.
Well, here's my
them
contact
some other
information.
time.
So, you know, keep in touch. You know, follow me on Twitter, because I sort of, you know, chatter about this stuff all the time, and it's always about, will humans be replaced? So I do a lot on that because, you know, of course, sales reps are like, they're not going to replace us.
Fantastic, and thank you very much for an inspiring presentation.
Well, thank you.
I think we got a lot of ideas, and also, you know, we at Kone like to think of feedback as a gift. So I think we got several very good gifts from you today. Just to mention a couple of one, I really love this idea of experience being the new product, and I'd like to think that, you know, we already have very good products. So if we can still make the experience great for our customers, then I think we're much better off than, for instance, Starbucks with their not so good coffee.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Don't tell them that, by the way. I got a cease and desist letter from them about six years ago saying, do not tell that story on stage anymore. But now I don't work at Gartner, so it is what it is.
Good. So I think it's our turn to give you a little gift.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so
It
much.
was great having you.
Thank you so much.
And let's give a big
Thank
hand.
you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.